East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Israel vows retaliation for Iran breaching a ceasefire despite denials by Tehran, leaving an earlier agreed truce in a Middle East conflict in limbo. Now, China is urging both sides to seek a political resolution. Japan as well expressing deep concerns over further retaliation, saying a de-escalation must be the top priority. But world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, set to meet in the Netherlands for the NATO summit that could bring a new defense spending pledge. Some European nations also pushing for a tougher stance on China. Now, Starbucks plays up the long-term potential of the Chinese market while plays down reports it's looking to sell its operations in a country where it's struggling with a low-priced competition.
The World Economic Forum's so-called Summer Davos gathering well underway here in Tianjin, China. The volatility in the Middle East, part of discussions here, as are the global shifts in the economic landscape. Also, China's role in tackling the climate crisis. We've been speaking to government and business leaders all day to figure out how they are intending to navigate these turbulent times.
Israel has accused Iran of violating a U.S.-backed ceasefire that came into effect a few hours ago. Defense Minister Israel Katz says that the military will continue its high-intensity strikes on Tehran in response to what he said were missiles fired by Iran. Now, Iranian news agencies, however, say Tehran has denied those claims. Well, Israel earlier agreed to U.S. President Donald Trump's proposal for a ceasefire with Iran. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that decision was shaped by his country's achievement of removing Tehran's nuclear and ballistic missile threat. Now, Mr. Trump had urged the two countries not to violate the truce, which first requires Iran to unilaterally halt all military operations, with Israel following suit 12 hours later. 4 people were killed in Beersheba in southern Israel, the first reported deaths in Israel since Mr. Trump announced the ceasefire. Iran had said that it would halt retaliation if Israel's bombing stopped. Now, responding to a possible ceasefire, China is calling on Israel and Iran to seek a political settlement.
中方高度关注中东局势发展，不希望紧张局势轮番升级，希望停火能够尽早实现。事实证明，军事手段带不来和平。 对话谈判才是解决问题的正道。
Japan also expressed deep concerns over further retaliation and stressed de-escalation as a top priority.
中東地域の平和と安定は我が国にとっても極めて重要であり、国際社会とも連携して我が国として必要なあらゆる外交的努力を引き続き行ってまいります。
All right, for more, Trent Murray, he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Now, Trent, this fragile truce lasting barely a few hours after it came into effect, Israel has basically vowed retaliation following those alleged ceasefire violations from Iran. What more do we know moving on from here?
Well, I think fragile is the perfect word to describe the situation. It does appear right now that this ceasefire announced by the US president is on very shaky ground indeed. What the Israelis are saying is that less than 3 hours after it officially came into force, they said that they detected 2 ballistic missiles being fired by Iran towards northern Israel. Certainly residents up there are reporting that they heard interceptions in the sky. In the past hour or so, we've seen some photos released by the IDF showing what looks to be a missile that was indeed part of Iran's very public stockpile. Now, in response to all of this, very quickly, the country's Defence Minister, Israel Katz, is vowing that he has instructed the IDF to continue intense operations targeting what he describes as regime assets and infrastructure in Tehran. It is a similar message from the IDF Chief of General Staff here, a very senior military officer, saying that they are now preparing to respond with force. Now, what the Iranians are saying is that they didn't fire those missiles and that they are accusing Israel effectively of being dishonest here. They have said, the top Security Council there putting out a statement, have said that they have no trust in the words of their enemies and they are going to keep their finger on the trigger. So I think right now it's going to be a very critical few hours ahead to see whether indeed the Israeli Defence Force follows up on that instruction from the Defence Minister and once again starts bombing Tehran. You would imagine if that happens, then the ceasefire will likely be broken and both sides will be back into the skirmishes that we've seen over the past 11 or 12 days or so.
So we are getting those sort of conflicting reports, one saying one struck the other, but the other denying it. So all in, what has the reaction been to this ceasefire coming from Israel?
Well, look, anecdotally, I can tell you I was down earlier at my local coffee shop speaking to some people there, some regular friends I have, and there is, I think, a cautious degree of optimism, somewhat. They certainly were shocked by the news, but at a more macro level, what the government is saying is that the danger remains. The IDF Home Command, which is in charge of managing the home front here, has not lifted the state of emergency yet. Schools are closed, many businesses are shuttered, and they are asking people to make sure that they still have that plan of how to get to their nearest shelter if indeed there is another ballistic missile attack. So I think there was initially a degree of optimism, but very cautious optimism, especially given the words being exchanged right now between Tel Aviv and Tehran.
All right, many thanks for that report. Trent Murray speaking to us live from Tel Aviv. Now, checking in on how the global markets have reacted to the events in the Middle East. Green across the board, with the Kospi leading the gains in the region. The South Korean boss ended the day up nearly 3%. Hang Seng followed the trend with 2% gains, and Nikkei also breathing a sigh of relief, 1%. All right, zooming in now on the Chinese markets, Shanghai, Shenzhen bosses ending the day solidly in the green, both closing just over 1% higher. Crude oil futures sold off sharply in light of the geopolitical events overnight. WTI, Brent both down about 4%. Crude prices had jumped on Sunday evening after the U.S. joined Israel's campaign against Iran. Now, the rush to riskier assets today has also dulled the shine in gold, currently in the red 1.45%. Economies worldwide, according to the head of the World Economic Forum, is facing its most complex geopolitical climate in decades, and it is hurting global growth. The warning comes as WEF holds its second largest annual meeting, the Summer Davos, at the largest port city in northern China. Well, day one saw a flurry of discussions. About 1,700 leaders from 90 countries took part, diving into issues such as artificial intelligence, fintech, climate, and the future of work. Well, their mission is to harness innovation and chart a path through global uncertainty. For more CNA's Olivia Seong, she joins us live now from the World Economic Forum in Tianjin, China. Olivia, how are participants reacting to this whole Middle East situation?
Well, Talia, the situation between Iran and Israel has continued to evolve hour by hour. We've been getting real-time reactions from the participants here. And the number one thing that they are telling us, whether it's government or business leaders that we've been speaking to, is that the situation is extremely volatile. But more than that, extremely difficult to predict. And that is leading to many businesses taking on a wait-and-see approach. I also spoke to Egypt's investment and foreign trade minister, and he told me what this uncertainty means for his country and its economic prospects.
Overall, the word that I would describe the whole situation, it's uncertainty. It's affecting global trade. It's now affecting oil, which all of these factors would have their repercussions on major economies as well as emerging economies. In the case of Egypt, we are importers of gas, and that has a reflection in our budget, in our projections of how we see the world. But more importantly, our worry is if these conflicts prolonged in terms of time, that will create major repercussions for the global economy and for our economy as well.
Have there been any recalibrations made in the longer term with all these plans to undergo structural reforms in the long run, given what's happening?
Actually, on the contrary. We the saying, don't waste a crisis. So as an economic team, a member of the economic team, our view is this is our opportunity, is to expedite, to push more for the structural reforms that long overdue, but using the crisis, let's just put things in the right perspective. So we're not slowing down, we're actually going full speed.
You mentioned also crisis. Perhaps some might view the U.S. under the Trump administration's reciprocal tariffs being a threat. We know Egypt has a baseline tariff of 10%. Is it an opportunity?
And the 10% is actually one of those baseline tariffs, so it puts us at an advantage vis-a-vis other countries. But our trade agenda is similar. We decided to cut the time and cost to release goods at the imports by 75% in 1 year. And we're on track to achieve this, not only by the end of the year, but actually by September this year. China is an important relationship for Egypt, historically, economically, politically. And we've always in Egypt have a balanced relationship with all the parties. So the dialogue that I have with our counterparts, I met the Chinese Minister of Trade. I told him exactly what I just mentioned previously, is that it's about balancing the trade deficit through investments and trade. We talked about how we would want to see investments from Chinese companies to Egypt, making sure that we have deep industrialization with deep localization, because that's what matters. Today, the fear in the European context or the US is that Chinese companies would use some countries as a gateway, a backdoor to Europe, through minor assembly operations. That will not fly. And in the Egyptian context, we're very conscious of that.
So lots of uncertainty. I guess that is the general consensus, Olivia. We've got day one of the forum. I believe it's wrapping up. With certainty, can you tell us more about what else is going to be in focus at the World Economic Forum?
Yes, Atali, things are kind of winding down for today, but a lot has happened since this morning. Participants have been busy attending numerous sessions here, which, if you were to ask me, discussions have been framed by several bright spots and dark clouds. Let's talk about the bright spots first. Many of the popular sessions, we saw crowds and lines forming outside the venue of many of these sessions relating to artificial intelligence. A lot of talk about future applications and correspondingly what this means for the tech race and how we can ensure that the workforce and talent is ready to cope with an AI world. But then turning to the dark clouds that are on the horizon or perhaps already here, economists we've been speaking to say that the global economic outlook prospects are pretty uncertain. Our team spoke to the former WTO chief economist, Robert Koopman, who said he's predicting an economic slowdown in the U.S. and an increased possibility of a recession in America, partly due to the Trump administration's sweeping global tariffs, but more so because of the unpredictability of the Trump administration's policies, whether it's relating to immigration or in terms of research and development spending as well. Others are saying that in relative terms, China then looking to be perhaps pretty attractive for investors.
When it came to the target around the 5% growth target, it was a mixed picture. So about half of the chief economists believed that that target could be met, and about half believed that it would not necessarily be met. And generally, when it comes to expectations around fiscal policy and monetary policy, both are expected to be looser than they have been before by the majority of the chief economists concerned. So I think relatively positive, relatively stable compared to many other parts of the world. And that, of course, starts to make it quite an interesting and attractive place. Stability and certainty in the midst of a lot of instability and uncertainty can be attractive.
And this comes as next all eyes will be on the Chinese Premier Li Qiang's speech tomorrow at the opening plenary session. What sort of signals will he send about China's economic outlook? And observers saying that businesses likely wanting to look out for specifics when it comes to emerging sectors like AI or green energy. Oteli.
Looks like it's going to be another busy day for you tomorrow, Olivia. Thanks so very much for now. Olivia Seong there reporting to us live from the World Economic Forum in Tianjin, China. And I will be having more updates from Olivia a little later this hour on East Asia Tonight. Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says that his country's relationship with China is more important than before at a time of global turbulence and uncertainty. Mr. Wong met President Xi Jinping today during an official visit. Tan Si-hui with this report.
Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says Chinese President Xi Jinping is in a unique position, having engaged and met with all of Singapore's prime ministers, including Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. PM Wong hopes to continue this deep level of mutual trust established by his predecessors and to bring both sides closer together.
In this time of global turbulence and uncertainty, I believe the China-Singapore relationship is more important than before, and we can work together to establish closer ties and also to cooperate in regional and multilateral platforms to continue to strengthen multilateralism and the rules-based global order for the benefit of all countries.
This being his first official visit as Prime Minister beyond Southeast Asia, he says it reflects the close and steadfast partnership between both sides. Mr. Xi acknowledged this gesture, saying it demonstrates the importance that Mr. Wong places on Singapore-China relations. He also noted Singapore's steady economic and social development, with the country successfully completing its leadership transition.
相信在总理先生和新一届政府领导下，新加坡国家建设事业将取得更大进步。今年也是中新建交35周年。面对当前变乱交织的国际形势，中方愿同新方加强战略沟通，拉紧合作纽带，携手应对挑战，为两国人民带来更多的福祉。
Both sides also agreed to maintain open and inclusive trade as a key driver of economic growth and stability amid the evolving global landscape. They also support a rules-based multilateral trading system and the relevance of global economic institutions. The foreign ministers from both sides also met and reaffirmed the strong bilateral relationship.
It is a unique and special relationship, and the most important ingredient is trust, is the ability to look forward, not just in election cycles, but in decades and centuries.
我愿同你继续保持我们的紧密沟通，良好的工作上的合作，我们共同来推动中西关系保持一个健康稳定发展的势头，同时我们也为地区的和平
PM Wong also met with Mr. Zhao Leji, the chairman of China's National People's Congress. Both sides agree they'll continue working closely through collaboration. Prime Minister Wang will be in Tianjin on Wednesday to attend the World Economic Forum's Summer Davos, where he'll participate in a special dialogue. He'll likely talk about the importance of upholding a rules-based, multilateral global order. He's also expected to meet foreign leaders on the sidelines of the event before making his way back to Beijing to meet Singaporeans working and living there. Tan Zihui, CNA, Beijing.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, port activity in China picks up speed as exporters rush to get goods to the US before tariffs take effect. And as the South Korean government moves to realize its stablecoin goal, the Bank of Korea calls for safety and caution. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and Roland Lim joins us now for business news. So, Roland, we mentioned earlier in the bulletin about the fall in oil prices. What's been the domino effect?
Well, as you can imagine, the fall in oil prices is also affecting the energy prices. Drop in oil impacting stocks in Japan, energy stocks losing in the market. Impacts was the worst percentage loser in the Nikkei with 6.79% in the red. Oil refiner Idemitsu Kosan and Enios Holdings also ending the day just 2% in the red. Shipping firms also fell, with Kawasaki Kaisen and Mitsui O.S.K. Lines losing 1.3% and 1.42% respectively. Now, Patrick Kennedy from All Source Investments explains why there are reasons to stay cautious in the energy market.
We're very cautious right now. We've had a hedge on for most of the year. It's our secular view that there's a clear regime change going underway, not just in Iranian markets. So back in 2022, we went from this low interest rate environment, low rate environment, very low geopolitical tension, low volatility. And you fast forward to today, we have higher rates, we have inflation concern, higher geopolitical tensions, and much more volatility. We think that this recent vow in the Middle East is part of that regime change, so we're investing accordingly. We know that there's a lot of people out there that are trying to play the energy markets and that sort of thing, but this weekend's action is a perfect example of how that can hurt you. If you looked at Saturday night and someone asked a professional investor, how's the market going to open on Monday? Most would say the market's going to open down, oil is going to be up. It was the exact opposite. So we come in, futures are up, we finish the day close to 1%, and oil is down on the day. So we think it's a fool's errand to try and predict the next move in oil. We do have exposure to commodities, but it's more so betting on the volatility. So we have different traders that can bet long and short positions on any commodity exposure we have, and that's how we prefer it rather than taking a long-term view on any one commodity. And this weekend is a perfect example of why.
Now, China's ports have just had their busiest week, likely due to exporters rushing to ship their goods to the U.S. before the end of the Trump administration's pause of reciprocal tariffs. Now, last week, nearly 7 million containers were reportedly processed by Chinese ports. That's a 6% increase week on week, just after Beijing and Washington agreed to a trade truce at the start of the month. Meanwhile, cargo flights from China also keeping level despite the end of the de minimis tariff exemption, which was one of the main drivers of international cargo, as demand from other markets make up for the drop. China's export activity is part of a trend amongst Asian exporters reporting a surge. Shipments from Vietnam and Thailand up 35% in May on year, while Taiwan nearly doubled as companies rushed to get their goods to U.S. shores during the tariff pause. The surge, however, threatens to complicate tariff negotiations as rising exports to the U.S. widens Asian countries' trade surplus with Washington. Starbucks says it is not currently considering a full sale of its China operations in response to a report in the financial magazine Caixin. Without disclosing where it got the information, Caixin reported on Monday that the U.S. coffee chain had been considering a full sale of its Chinese operations. The magazine claims Starbucks had held preliminary talks with more than a dozen potential buyers. According to reports, Starbucks kicked off a formal sale process of its China operations in May. Interested buyers reportedly had until the end of last week to submit answers to a list of questions. Starbucks has declined to comment further on the details of the sale process. The sale comes as Starbucks loses market share to lower-priced Chinese rivals such as Luckin and Coty Coffee that have cheaper options. Starbucks' market share in China has declined to 14% in 2024 from 34% in 2019. The senior deputy governor of South Korea's central bank says it is better to introduce one-denominated stable coins at a gradual pace to avoid market disorder. Ryo Sang-dai's comments comes as the president, Lee Jae-myung, moves towards delivering on his election pledge to allow companies to issue won-based stablecoins. The Democratic Party is proposing legislation designed to set up necessary regulatory infrastructure. Mr. Ryo says that stablecoins will have a significant impact on monetary policy, and so they could first allow regulated banks to be issuers before moving on to private companies. Governor Ri Chang-yong also noted that the need for a safety net to prevent market disorder. Stable coins are widely used by crypto traders to move funds between tokens. They differ from Bitcoin because they are pegged to traditional assets such as fiat currencies. They are being adopted by more and more companies worldwide. Mr. Ryo says that the BOK will consult with major commercial banks to prepare for a second pilot test. And you're up to date with the business news.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. Well, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, ramping up defense spending, a key issue at this year's NATO summit. The Pentagon's also wanting its Asian allies to do the same and spend 5% of their GDP on defense. How likely is that? Well, we ask an expert in just a moment. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Israel accuses Iran of breaking a ceasefire brokered by the U.S. just hours after the truce came into effect. Iran denies the allegations. China and Japan calling for a stop to the war, Tokyo saying that de-escalation must be the top priority. And NATO leaders are set to officially agree to a big increase in defense spending. Our NATO chief says that there is total commitment from the U.S. to the North Atlantic Security Alliance. Mark Rutte was speaking as NATO leaders arrive at The Hague for a two-day summit to sign off on a big new defense spending goal.
My message to my European colleagues is stop worrying so much. Start to make sure that you get the investment plans done, that you get industrial base up and running, that the support for Ukraine remains at a high level. Luckily, it is still today. I mean, this is what you should work on, and stop running around being worried about the US. They're with.
Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and President Lee Jae-myung are both skipping the security talks this week. The Japanese Foreign Ministry cited, quote, various circumstances, although local media said that Mr. Ishiba's cancellation was because a meeting with Mr. Trump was unlikely. For more, William Denslow, he joins us live from The Hague. So, Will, we heard there Mr. Rutte saying that U.S. support for NATO is here to stay. I mean, tell us more. I mean, how seriously can we take this?
Well, I tell you, we've been hearing for months, really, from U.S. representatives in a NATO capacity that they are very much committed to the military alliance, but they say that they simply can't, nor should they, operate everywhere at once, especially when it comes to the war in Ukraine on Europe's doorstep. The message from Washington is that Europe needs to do more. This was put incredibly bluntly a few months ago by the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, where he said that Uncle Sam would not become Uncle Sucker. A very strong message from the Trump administration urging NATO allies to do more on defence spending and defence capabilities. It seems very much that Washington is getting its wish. Mark Rutte, NATO's Secretary General, says it is imperative for the US's allies within the military alliance do more to step up to the plate. He is confident that they are now taking this step with this pledge that we're expecting this week for NATO to boost this annual defence spending from the current benchmark of 2% annual GDP to 5%. The real question is when allies will start making commitments to hit that number.
Yeah, no one wants to be Uncle Sucker, that's for sure. In the meantime, we've got some European nations. I mean, they're calling for a tougher line on China. How is this issue expected to surface during such talks?
Interesting. We've heard from Kaja Kallas, the EU's top diplomat this week, who says that the relationship with China requires a dose of realism, as she put it. She said there are areas of strong cooperation, things like the environment and ways of cooperating on that. But she said there are real concerns, especially when it comes to China's involvement helping to facilitate Russia's war in Ukraine. That's a point reiterated by Mark Rutte we've been hearing so far this week. He's included China in a list of potential adversaries that NATO faces that include the likes of North Korea, Iran and indeed Russia. He says that now 3 or 5 of the 10 biggest defence players in the world are from Beijing. He says there is certainly a reason for that, and he says that this is a concern. He also provided a potential hypothetical where he argued that President Xi of China could use Vladimir Putin to, as he said, keep Europe busy should there be a war in Asia in the future. So he says this is very much a wider geopolitical threat. That is why he said he'd be open to Asian partners to do more when it comes to their own defence spending.
Thanks for that, Sam. That was William Denslow speaking to us live from The Hague. Now, when it comes to defense spending, the Pentagon has said that Asia should follow Europe and spend 5% of GDP on their militaries. Now, that's by no means feasible for many countries without economic and political repercussions, especially when the average global defense spending last year was at 1.9% of GDP. A figure according to the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Well, for more insights, we are joined now by Tom Corben. He's a research fellow of foreign policy and defense from the United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney. Well, thanks for joining us today, Tom. So I just want to touch on what the Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba said last night, I believed, that the focus for defense budget, for instance, should not hinge on a numerical target, such as a percentage relative to the GDP. So, Tom, what do you make of that? Does it make sense?
Look, I think that's a fair assessment, and I think that's the line you've heard coming out of most regional capitals in Asia since the Trump administration has taken this harder line on the defense spending of its allies and partners. I mean, defense spending as a percentage of GDP is ultimately a fairly crude measure of whether any given country is serious about their national defense. And to go to what I think Prime Minister Ishiba is really saying here, it's really about what Japan or any other country for that matter would be spending its defense dollars on in terms of defense capabilities, in terms of specific investments in defense infrastructure, all as a means, mind you, to make these countries better partners for the United States to uphold regional security collectively. And at the end of the day, this is actually what the Trump administration is looking for. To some extent, they're looking for regional partners to look after their own security, but they also want these partners to be able to work with the United States in a more capable manner.
Now, speaking of partnership, I want to touch on alliance strains because, earlier in June, Japan reportedly cancelled this crucial 2+2 foreign defense meeting when the U.S. wanted it to further up its defense spending. We've seen, leaders from Japan and South Korea not attending this NATO summit. Are there signs of cracks in the alliance showing?
Look, I think the timing of this cancellation, which I think I would frame more as a postponement, given the significance and the importance of these annual meetings. The timing is not ideal for Prime Minister Ishiba. It's important to remember that he is facing an upper house election in Japan towards the end of next month, where, to be quite frank, the ruling party is not expected to do particularly well. But on the other hand, I think it's perfectly fair for Prime Minister Ishiba to want to come to any sort of meeting with the United States where these sorts of issues around defense spending and Japan's contributions to collective defense will be on the table from a position of political strength. And given the current state of the domestic political environment in Japan at the moment, Prime Minister Ishiba was just not really in a position to do that before the outcome of the election later next month.
So, spending 5% of GDP on defense, for instance, if the countries do so, what does that mean fiscally, politically for countries, at a time of global economic uncertainty?
Look, there's really two questions here. There's the question of whether it's doable for a lot of these countries. And the answer, if the figure is 5% that they're aiming for, is no, well, at least not in the next couple of years. Even the 5% figure that's been floated at NATO will take pretty much every member country at least a decade to reach. And I think it's important to note that that figure includes not only defense capabilities, but also defense adjacent things like infrastructure and what have you that go along with it. But you're right. These demands that are being placed on regional partners in Asia by the United States are going to make it very tricky for a lot of countries who have other priorities in terms of their economic development, in terms of where they would like to put their money. But then that's not even to say what the domestic political calculations or concerns around those issues would be when that is put to the general public and when that is put to a voting public in particular. How governments that are supposed to implement those increased defense spending plans are actually going to do it in a way that doesn't come at the expense of things that, I mean, to be quite frank, the everyday person probably cares more about in terms of their economic well-being.
So I hear what you're saying, Tom. 5% is not really realistic for a lot of these Asian countries, but we have escalating crises, happening in Ukraine and Middle East that's reshaping the way perhaps the countries are thinking about defense. And do you think that that's also a signal for them to have a new security paradigm shift?
Look, I wouldn't say a new security paradigm shift. I think that the trend for the last couple of years has been towards the return of military power as one of the foremost tools of international relations and the way that states engage in the world. And that's largely been driven by a number of crises that we've seen around the world. Obviously, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the recent reconfiguration of conflict in the Middle East across the last couple of years, but also the recent tensions you've seen in our region, whether it's over the Taiwan Strait, whether it's confrontations between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea, or between China and Japan, or China and South Korea in Northeast Asia. I think these are all pretty strong indicators that the military power and the need for countries to invest in military power has really returned to the forefront of geopolitics. And I think that it makes perfect sense in that regard for not only the United States to be requesting that regional partners do more for their own defense and collective security, but that these countries themselves legitimately believe that they need to do so.
So the military power, does that include nuclear arms? Because South Korea right now, they aren't making nuclear weapons. But I think since 2023, discussion has sort of entered the mainstream, whether it's driven by North Korea's growing arsenal or doubts about the U.S. nuclear guarantee. To what extent do you think this actually strengthens South Korea's case?
Look, there are a number of factors that would influence South Korea's thinking over whether it would go nuclear one day or not. I don't think there is any real substantial evidence to suggest right now that that is what it is planning to do so. But you're right in that there are small but very vocal and growing groups on both the left and the right in South Korea who are advocating for a South Korean nuclear deterrent. The flip side of that is that those concerns that South Korea has can be used in the alliance setting with the United States to talk more about shared security, to talk more about South Korea's anxieties about North Korea and wider regional security dynamics in a way that makes the alliance more fit for purpose. Now, part of that will obviously be South Korea being more willing to engage more widely in the regional military issues. But I wouldn't suspect that South Korea would simply sprint straight for a nuclear weapon in this case. I think we're some way off that. And it's more a way to bring up issues of military planning and military activities in an alliance setting that will better reflect what South Korea's interests are and what its national objectives are.
Right. We hear what you're saying. Thank you so very much for your insights and joining us on East Asia tonight. Tom Corben there from the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. We are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, climate crisis also in focus at this year's World Economic Forum. Updates from our correspondent in just a moment. The World Economic Forum's second largest annual gathering is underway at the largest port city in northern China. Representatives from more than 90 countries are expected to tackle emerging technologies, economic shifts, and the future of work at the event known as the Summer Davos. Well, CNA's Olivia Seong is working hard for us, and she joins us live once again from the WEF in Tianjin, China. Okay, Ollie, so how to tackle the global crisis also in focus at the forum? China being a key player, of course, as the world's second largest economy. And I believe you spoke to China's special climate change envoy. What came out of that?
That's right. Our conversation with the Chinese Special Climate Change Envoy Liu Zhenmin coming just shortly after we had heard, recently Chinese President Xi Jinping announced that China would be setting new emissions cutting targets for 2035, and that to include all economic sectors and all greenhouse gases for the first time. And that's set to be announced before the COP30 annual climate summit is set to take place in November later this year. But the climate envoy, when we're speaking, he said that this meeting, this gathering could prove to be quite challenging because what has changed, we have seen the U.S. withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement under the second Trump administration. Also, the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East weighing on global economic growth at a time when there is a greater need for climate financing to move the energy transition globally forward. Have a listen to our conversation.
Forthcoming COP30 to be convened in November in Beirut, Brazil, would be one of the difficult, challenging sessions ever since history. The U.S. has been really the leader among the developed country parties, as well as the leader in the world. So when their withdrawal really had a very negative impact on the global confidence. We need to continue to move forward with agreement on climate financing. With these reasons, I just explained that I think it will be very difficult to have a universal consensus on climate financing.
Do you see that being a vacuum in the climate change multilateral framework that China can fill?
There's a vacuum, but this vacuum of leadership should be filled by different groups and by all the parties. It will not just be filled by one or the other party, But China is one of the leading countries. I think the leading country. We should continue to play our role. China has been the champion for the energy transition and has been leader for the innovation and the deployment of the new energy and for the renewable energy.
What about in terms of China's own climate change policy and carbon goals that we know are set for 2030 and 2060? Is that also part of how China is thinking about its contributions to global climate change cooperation?
China is a world's second largest economy, and of course we are the largest emitter. China's greenhouse gas emissions account for around 30% of the global total. And of course, why we have that big share for the emission? Because our China's manufacturing also contribute to around 30% of our global manufacturing capacity. China's manufacturing not for China itself, it's for the world. At the same time, we are continuing our policy to control our carbon intensity, speed up our transition with the deployment of renewable energy capacities. But we know our challenges. I think we are determined to continue our energy transition processes. So in the next 5 years, we are going to try to achieve. I think the world should be confident in China. We are going to achieve our carbon peaking before 2030.
There are some observers who say that for climate cooperation to take place, there needs to be cooperation between the two biggest economies of the world, China and the US. Is there cooperation on the climate front still going on with the Trump administration?
Government-to-government cooperation on climate change between US and China actually suspended due to the change of the US policy. But from Chinese side, we are trying to maintain this our local government cooperation, the business community cooperation, think tank cooperation with the U.S. colleagues to convincing them that climate change it's a global issue, and climate change is no longer a threat in the future. It's already becoming a real crisis. So the United States should be on board.
Besides the U.S., the climate envoy telling me that China is also looking to cooperate with other regions, including Southeast Asia and Europe. China and EU are expected to hold high-level climate change talks in Beijing next month. Otelli.
Oh, that was a great interview. Really enjoyed that. Thanks so much. Olivia Seong reporting to us live from the World Economic Forum in Tianjin, China. Now, staying on climate issues, Australian agriculture has suffered its fair share of disasters in recent years, including droughts, bushfires and flooding. But there is one vineyard that is fighting back with novel solutions. It's applying sunscreen on grapes and harvesting by night. Roger Maynard has more.
Under the weak sun of a winter sky, the vines are bare and the land lies largely dormant. It's another 6 months until the harvest of this vineyard in one of Australia's premier wine regions. But that doesn't mean there's no work to be done.
I'm going through with the electronic loppers and doing our big cuts because we're restructuring these vines because it's been about 10 years. And then my partner Katie is coming through behind and doing our cuts for cane selection.
At 25, Callum Scarborough is the third generation of a well-known local family of vignerons who pursue a strict programme of sustainability and biodiversity. It's hard to imagine now, in the middle of the Australian winter, the temperatures here soar to 40 degrees plus in the summer. But necessity being the mother of invention, that triggered another idea. If you thought only humans needed sunscreen to protect their skin, you'd be wrong. In extreme heat, grapes also need shielding from the sun. Extremely high temperatures can damage the grapes and slow down production. But not now, thanks to a unique spray-on sunscreen adopted by husband and wife team Jeremy and Liz Scarborough.
It's a lovely inert clay product. We literally spray it out with our fungicide sprayer onto the canopy, and we can pull that lever just before a heat event. So we wait till there's a forecast hot spell, and that white coating, it literally makes the vineyard look like it's had snow on it. It does two things. It's a physical barrier for any exposed grapes, but that whiteness of the canopy reflects heat, and that keeps my canopy functional when the temperatures are above where the grapevine really wants to be working.
It's not the only unusual method employed by the Scarboroughs to combat the heat of the day. They also harvest at night, which lowers the temperature of the fruit.
We mechanically harvest, and really that's about one, cost, but also very importantly the temperature of the fruit as it comes in, because we believe we see a quality gain in picking it while the fruit is cool.
The family's dedication to producing a sustainable product means looking after the entire ecosystem, including soil, plant life and water. The Scarboroughs see themselves as stewards of the land, rather than trying to manipulate the ground to their needs. Though that also means being flexible, especially when it comes to meeting the challenge of climate change.
Look, it is adding to our costs. So if we're needing to look at things like sunscreen, that's an additional cost to what we need to do. It has increased our need for capitalisation for equipment so that we can actually harvest and process the fruit within a finite time. The jury's still out whether or not we may have varieties that may become unsuitable for growing in the Hunter Valley because it is becoming too warm for those. So we're not at that point yet, but that is a possibility as well.
Conditions are pretty challenging at the moment, but you know, Australia's always been at the front of innovation. We're pretty keen to adopt things. We're not bound by some of the restrictions of Europe, so no, I think the future's bright.
They produce about 35,000 cases of wine a year here, many of them whites, such as Chardonnay. Hopefully the family will continue winemaking for generations to come, both by day and by night. Roger Maynard, CNA at Corben in the New South Wales Hunter Valley.
I hope you've enjoyed Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can also find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.